All right, let's just do a quick audio test. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Cool. So this week is a good week. We're going to be doing React. We're going to start with React this week. So just the introductions of it, get our tools that we need, get them all installed, quick little React tutorial, and then we're going to attempt, hopefully we'll have enough time to attempt to deploy it to Netlify by the end of the class. So hopefully by the end of the class you have a live React site on Netlify and we're good to go. Now for those of you that have experience with React already and maybe you have your own preferred deployment solutions, maybe you're using GitHub, that's totally fine. If that's what you want to do and you want to use GitHub to deploy your React application, you are welcome to do so. However, I won't provide support for that. So I will support your React apps, but if you want to use GitHub, you're going to have to do your own support for that. That being said, let's do a quick review about last week. Hopefully you guys have all got your quizzes in. After class has started, they are technically late. It doesn't mean that they go away. I leave them open. I used to close them out and make them disappear, but I stopped doing that. But they will be late, and then they're subject to a deduction. I think it's 10% per day for every day that they're late. Even if you want to like redo the quiz today, I wouldn't, because it would be subject to the 10% as well, I think. Yeah, it would be. But I think almost everybody did it. I didn't see any that were outstanding. I'm still learning the Lakehead shell a little bit. Had some issues with removing corrupted attempts that were caused by the shell. Can't figure that out, so I just reached out to Rich. So if you were one of the ones that reached out to me asking me about clearing an attempt, I'm just waiting for a response from Rich on how to figure that out, on how to get the attempt. There doesn't seem any obvious way to do it. I know we can do it in Blackboard, just not sure how it's done in the Lakehead shell. All right, cool. Let's talk about a little bit about last week and what we covered. Super basic, right? We basically introduced the class. Talked about my expectations, talked a little bit about the tools that we're going to be using and the stack that we're going to be using. And then we kind of got into the basics, right? We got into the basics about variables and data types and commenting and that kind of stuff. Most of the stuff you guys already know, you seem to be fairly comfortable with. I think the newer things that might be a little bit of a trick would be talking about higher order functions, even though you guys have likely used a number of higher order functions already. We talked about arrow functions. I'm not sure how much you guys had experience with arrow functions in your intro to JavaScript class, but we will be primarily using arrow functions in this class, so you should become fairly familiar with them. We talked about destructuring and spread, and that's probably the one that would catch most of you up, would be destructuring and spread. Though both of those tools are extremely handy to use, and we will be using them a lot actually throughout this course. So you will, by the time you're done this class, you'll be fairly proficient with vanilla JavaScript and hopefully the two frameworks, React and the Express MVC that we're going to build. So that's the goal. Did you guys have any questions about any of the basic JavaScript from last week? No? Cool. Awesome. So we tonight are going to start with React, but we have a couple of packages that we need to download in order to use React. The first one we need is Node. So Node is a runtime binary that lives on your system. Basically, it allows you to run JavaScript via the command line. That's essentially what it's going to provide you. So we need Node in place in order for us to do our development. We're going to be developing in React, and at the end of the day, when you're done with your React application and you go to publish it onto the internet, you will actually do a build command which takes your React application and turns it into vanilla JavaScript. So React by itself has a lot of cool little tools for while you're doing your development so that you can test your code and be able to see debugging issues and stuff like that, plus all of the templating that it provides you to make development in React very simple. However, when you go to publish it, the React library essentially can't exist on the net as vanilla code because it relies on packages from Node, and Node is not available in our clients, which would be our browsers. So what happens is we go through a build process. It provides whatever libraries it requires and then uglifies it, condenses it, and then that is what gets applied to to your published website. So we need Node on our computers in order to be able to use all the handy little features of React. So we're going to install that first. And I did provide you a link in the Lakehead shell. If you go to the Lesson 2 module, you'll find the Node.js download. If you click that, it's going to take you to this page here. And depending on what operating system you're working with, if you're working with Windows, then you can go ahead and do that installer. If you're using Mac, use that installer. If you're using Linux, you're going to have to sudo apt-get node. That's just the way it's done. There's no actual download for it. It doesn't have a binary for it. Incidentally, if you're using a Mac and you have Brew and you have confidence on how Brew works, you can also use Brew to install Node as well. That's also an option. I do apologize for that. We have guys working on our house right now, so you might hear strange noises here and there from them hammering, sometimes backup beeping and kind of stuff like that. So I don't know if you guys can actually hear it, but it's loud here. Can you get React on a Mac? Yes, you can. React is the library that we're going to install is just JavaScript at the end of the day, Cameron. So when you pull it down, it'll just be a Node module. As long as you can install Node, you can install React. So yes, you will be able to install React. So go ahead, click your installer, whatever one is your choice. I recently switched over to Windows from Mac a little while ago, mostly because a lot of the students that I was teaching had Windows machines, and with me being on a Mac when 90% of the class was Windows, it was really difficult to make sure everybody could follow along. So I switched over. Alright, so once you download it, it does take a little bit, depending on how fast your internet speed is. I'm on a gigabit here, so it should be quick. That being said, though, I'm on Wi-Fi, so I'm at the mercy of my network. So once you click it, it's going to open it, and it'll walk you through the setup. Now, I've already installed it. If you already have it installed, it's not going to do anything to corrupt it in any way. In fact, it will update the Node version that you currently have. So you click Next. You can change, repair, remove. That's my options. Yours should not be those options. Your options should be to install. Basically, just keep clicking Next until it installs. If you get stuck in the lesson plan for today, there are nice little screen captures here that walk you through it step by step. So I'll just use the screen captures instead of changing or removing and reinstalling. So make sure you accept the terms. If you don't accept the terms, it won't install, and then you'll have a lot of difficulty taking this class. Choose where you want to install it. I just generally leave it under the program files. If you understand what this is doing and you understand the ramifications of you changing it, then go ahead. You can change where it's being located, but then you need to make sure you update your path variable in Windows so that the binary is pointed to properly when you open up your command line tool. If you have no idea what I'm saying, just leave it where it is. Once it's installed, you're going to have these package options. Don't modify these package options. Just leave them the way they are and click Next. Don't worry about installing Chocolatey. I've had a lot of people try to install it and it causes a lot of issues. If you want to use Chocolatey, which is just another package manager, you can install that separately from this. You don't need this to install it for you. And then click Install, and then you're going to have to improve it. Anytime you see this little shield, it's going to ask you for administrative rights. So your computer is going to go blank for a second. You're going to hear a ding, and then you're going to have to approve it. Make sure you say yes. Then it's going to go through the install process, copying all the new files over to the drive and creating the path variables, all that wonderful stuff. And then when you're done, you're going to get Finish. So if you could do me a favor and just write done in the chat so I know that your node is done. So I think we still have a few people that are out. There's 30 of you here today and 17 of you have written done. I just don't want to move too fast because these tools can be a little tricky, especially if you guys don't have a lot of experience with using command line tools, which is what we're going to be using next. Cool. You know what? I'm just going to ask, is anybody not done? Is anybody still waiting on the install or the download? Okay. You can catch up? All right.
Still downloading as well, Sean.
Okay, no worries. I'll just explain what we're going to be doing as our shell that we're going to use. So, in the past, I've used the Windows PowerShell before. I don't like it. I don't use it in my day job. I don't use Windows in my day job. I use Linux with, it's called Terminator, which is just a shell emulator, but provides like a whole bunch of extra features into it. However, I have had a lot of students that like using Git Bash, which came when you installed Git. So if you installed Git from that SCM, or maybe it's not called that. I'm just going to write download Git because I can never remember the address for it. Git-SCM, that's what it is. If you downloaded Git from this tool, which you likely would have, you will likely have Git Bash. If you hit your Windows key and type in Git Bash, you should see it available to you. I prefer to use Git Bash over Windows PowerShell, mostly because it has standard Linux commands that make things a little bit easier to work with. But it's completely up to you. If you would prefer to use PowerShell, you can. For tonight, we're going to start with PowerShell, and then next week, after we're a little more comfortable with PowerShell, actually maybe in 2 weeks, I'm going to switch over to Git Bash, and then we can start using Git Bash, okay? But that'll give you a couple weeks to become familiar on whether or not you want to switch with Git Bash, because you can try Git Bash on your own. The commands are the same, because it still uses the underlying Windows command line tool. It's really just an emulator for it, all right? So it's up to you. We are going to use PowerShell tonight, and we're going to want to open up PowerShell in administrator mode only because of file permissions and that. This helps us bypass any file permissions issues that we might have. Before we do that, one more package I want to install is Yarn. I want to make sure that we have the Yarn tool set. It's optional, to be honest, because we can use npm to do anything that we're going to do. However, any of the tutorials that you see out there, or any of the feedback that you're going to get from different sites, a lot of people use Yarn with React. So I want you to be familiar with Yarn and the command lines that come with Yarn over npm for while you're learning React, just because it's the more common tool. If you don't care and you're fine with npm, then feel free to use npm. All right, so with Yarn, we're going to go to the installation Yarn, and if you look underneath the shell, you will see the Yarn download. Just go ahead and click that, and that will take you to installation for Yarn. In there, you can choose which operating system you're using, and the nice handy part is Linux is already in here if you want to use Linux, but macOS is in here as well. Again, I believe Yarn can be installed using the brew tool as well if you're using Mac. Once you're done that, go ahead and click on the download installer. That's going to download the Yarn installation package for you. And then, again, this is one of those things where if I go to install it over top, it's going to modify my current installation. So instead, I'll just walk you through that installation. We'll do this verification after we have Yarn down, just to make sure that everybody has Yarn. Then we'll do that step. So like I said, Yarn is just a package manager, just like npm. It actually uses the npm repository system online to be able to retrieve its packages. However, it has some benefits over npm. One has to do with the order of operations when it installs. The node package manager can cause things to be installed out of order, which can lead to issues where it works on one person's machine but then doesn't work on another just because of the way they did things, the way they installed things. Whereas Yarn enforces the order to always be the same, so you don't have to worry about that. That being said, though, that was a long time ago, and I don't know if npm still has that issue. It might not anymore. There might really be no difference. There might be other benefits, but I'm not 100% sure on what they are. All right, so once you've done installing Yarn, so go ahead and download the Yarn. Once you've got it, you're going to choose your operating system, download the installer. You'll know you're installing the right thing because it looks like a little cat, and you'll wind up with a little cat icon application. So you're going to click Next, accept the terms. Just leave the destination folder where it is, because once again, when we go to access Yarn within our command line tool, we want to make sure that we're accessing the correct binary location. If you don't do that, then you have to go adjust it under your Windows path variables. Then click Install, and then it completes the Yarn setup. And it doesn't take very long. It goes pretty quick. We are definitely moseying along through here, that's for sure. All right, we are totally ready to open up our shell for the first time. Is anybody still running through installs? So far we've installed Node with npm and Yarn. Is anybody still installing? No? Cool. All right, let's open up PowerShell. So I don't know how familiar you are with your Windows operating system, but your Windows key is really handy, especially with your arrow keys, because it allows you to do things like holding down the Windows key, hitting the left arrow, and docking your window to the left side. I use an ultra-wide monitor, so that's why it may seem formatted kind of strangely. If you are having any issues with reading my screen, please let me know. I know with the ultra-wide, once it down shrinks to a laptop screen, it can be a little tricky to see it. I will try to make sure that I increase the font size on things so that it should be legible, but just in case, okay? We're going to open up PowerShell. I'm just going to type right here inside the little Windows search thing here, PowerShell. If you're using a Mac, you can just use terminal. So you would type in terminal, and you don't need to open terminal on the Mac with sudo or anything like that. You will be fine just using terminal as is. It's only Windows users that generally have problems with some of these packages. Macs just work. That's the thing. Yes, you're going to use the terminal, Cameron. Yeah. So for those of you on Windows, we're going to use PowerShell, and you're going to choose to run it as an administrator. So once you click that button, you get that little ding. I think WebEx cuts out and you can't see what's happening, but click yes. Once you have PowerShell open, I'm going to not paste the meeting link. I'm going to just quickly modify the font size so that you guys can see what's going on. I think I have to go to 28. Or maybe I can do Control++. No. Oh, come on. I had problems with this once before as well. There we go. Regular. Just regular Sky. Yeah, not x86. It doesn't really matter, but yeah, I use the regular one. I don't think it makes a lick of difference, really. I think that's more performance-based. Can you guys read this font, or do you need me to increase it a bit? On the PowerShell. You gonna read it fine? Alright. Cool. So what we're going to do is just test to make sure that Node is installed. It doesn't matter where you are in the Windows system. As long as you are in the Windows system or the Mac system, you should be able to access Node. And the way we know that Node is installed, we just type in node-v and hit enter, and you should see the version number. If you don't see the version number, it will throw an error telling you the command is not found. If the command isn't found, something happened when you were installing, and you'll need to install again. Or, on occasion, sometimes I've had students that have had PowerShell open already, and then they install Node. The problem with that is that, just like in terminal, you need to make sure that the path gets updated for the shell, which means you would have to close PowerShell and reopen it, and then you should have access to Node. Let's also make sure that we have npm installed as well. We're going to do npm-v. It's going to take a second to think about it, but it should come back with the version number. It is fine if your version numbers are not the same as mine. If they're further ahead or even a little bit behind, that is totally okay. As long as your node version is above node 10, we'll be fine. If it's below node 10, then we definitely need to look at upgrading. Which isn't hard, it's pretty easy. Last thing we want to do is make sure yarn is installed, so if we type in yarn-v, we should get the yarn version as well. Okay. Anybody having any errors, or are we good so far? All right. I'm going to accept that as good. Cool, so we have the tools we need. We have Node, we have npm, we have yarn, we have all the things we need to be able to actually start creating our React application. So I'm just going to minimize this window, and the next thing we're going to do is actually quickly set up a little project folder for ourselves inside our file management system so that we can build a little tutorial today, like a little project tutorial today. I don't know how long this class will be. I'm always going to make the empty promise that class should go quickly and will be done on time or early, and almost always I'll be wrong. So just give you a heads up with that. So go ahead, create a new lesson file folder anywhere you're going to use your Comp 2068 files. I did mention last week that using OneDrive, Dropbox, Boxy, any of those things can cause some serious issues when you're trying to work with React or Node applications, mostly to do with Node modules. That's the issue. The other thing, the reason is because what will happen is the Node modules mixed with Dropbox or Boxy or any of those guys creates these ridiculously lengthy file paths, and it blows out the Windows file path length restriction, which causes these weird anomalies to happen where things won't install properly and stuff like that. So just make sure it's outside of whatever backup repository system, or you can even just shut it off. Like if you have Dropbox open, just turn it off. That also works. I don't know if it works for OneDrive, but it does work for Dropbox. The other thing to be aware of as well, if you do want to create these backups, all you have to do is just copy and paste them in, but you should delete the Node modules folder when you do that, and we'll see the reason why tonight, because the Node modules folder is pretty hefty. There's, like, when you install a Node module, you get a lot of stuff with it, like a lot of stuff. And you don't want all that bloat being in your Dropbox if you can avoid it. All right, so I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it Lesson 2. And this is where I'm going to work tonight, is in this Lesson 2 folder. So I'm going to open this now. I'm going to right-click and choose to open with code. You can just open up whatever IDE you're using and then open the folder as a project in that folder. I like VS Code because it gives you this wonderful little hint. Quick link. So I'm going to click open with code. Of course, it's going to open on the wrong screen. Let's open it over on the other screen. And I'm going to leave this file manager open as well, just so you can see what kind of happens when we go ahead and install a new React application. Plus, we're going to need the link, because we're going to need to change the current directory we're in to this directory that we want to access. So our shell is like, I don't know, it's like a text-based version of navigating our Windows operating system or your Mac operating system or Linux or whatever it is you're working with. It's a text-based way of being able to change directories, add files, remove files, modify files as well, right? Also be able to install new packages and applications within our program. Take a look at monitoring tools and monitoring applications that will work with our either the application we're trying to develop with, or also even just our Windows operating system or whatever operating system we're working with. So the shell is a very powerful tool for us. It also allows us to be able to create automation, so we can actually write automated scripts that will fire through and do things in Windows or in Mac or in Linux that you couldn't normally do with a GUI, right? This is an important tool as a programmer. It's a place that you're going to be a good chunk of your programming life will be in this shell. Mostly because you will be required in your jobs to do some developer operations things, at the very minimum setting up your own development machine. And in order to do that, you need to have that experience and comfortability with using a terminal or a shell. Okay, so PowerShell is the Windows default one. It was Windows' kind of answer to Mac's terminal, and arguably it's okay. It's not great though. It's not fantastic. It has issues. And they keep trying to fix it by coming out with things like Windows Linux subsystems, which are not great. They have a lot of bugs and a lot of issues in them. And then there's a new one on the horizon as well that I can't remember the name of it, but it's also another Windows one, and again, it's got some issues as well. That's why I do prefer Git Bash over PowerShell. That's my personal preference. So there's a few quick things that we can use to be able to navigate our Windows system. The command that I'm first going to teach you is cd, which stands for change directory. Cd takes an argument of the path of where you want to go. So if I do cd ... like so, with the dots following right after the cd, right up against it, what it will do is actually move us up a directory into the directory above. So you'll notice that I'm no longer in Windows System 32. I have moved to Windows. If I do cd ... again, you can even do a space, ... like so, that's going to take me to my C directory, and I'm now at the beginning part of my path. If I want to go back into Windows, I can just go cd, and I can type in Windows, exactly as I see it written up here, and hit enter, and that will cd into the Windows directory. If I want to cd back into the System 32, I can also do a shortcut where I just type in sys, like so, hit tab, and if it's the wrong one, I can hit tab again, and I should get to the correct one, and then hit enter, and now I'm in the System 32 directory. If I want to climb back up the path all in one go, I can do cd ... and that will actually take me up one directory and then up the second directory. So now I'm back into the C drive. If I want to cd into a specific folder, I need to be aware of some of the conventions in the PowerShell. If your folder structure contains a space, PowerShell will blow up when you try to cd into that directory. Okay, so what we can do instead is do cd space, add a quote character, and then we can get the path that we want. And the easiest way to get the path is by going into your File Explorer, navigating to the directory you want to navigate into, click inside there once into the address bar, and that will actually auto-highlight the path for you. Copy it using Control-C. Hopefully everybody knows how to use their clipboards. And then in PowerShell, you can just hit Control-V. If you're in Terminal, you can actually drag the folder from the file, what's it called now? Finder. You can drag the folder from Finder directly into Terminal, and it will populate the path for you. And then we have to make sure we close that quote character. So quote here, the directory that we're going into, and then the terminating quote. When I hit enter, it's going to change into that directory for us. And the reason why we're using the quote characters, as you can see, I have a space in Sean McKinnon, so that would actually cause an issue for me, because it would actually terminate right where that space is and then blow up and tell me there's no such command as McKinnon Dropbox. Everybody still with me? All right. Fancy. Yes, it is. It's a little fancy. All right. So now we are in this folder right now, but we're in this folder in a text way, right? We're text-based. We've officially gone into the matrix. We no longer need to see the folder. We can see the folder in code. All right. So we're going to install React, but we're actually not. So React can be used in a few different ways. You can just go download the libraries or use the CDN, which stands for a Content Delivery Network, and attach them to an HTML file and build your own React app that way. That is totally fine. There's a lot of people that do that. In fact, I would say most professional React developers would probably follow that approach. More people, though, love the Create React App library that actually makes scaffolding a React application a lot easier. So React by itself is not a framework. React by itself is a library, but Create React App is a framework. The difference is a framework will actually provide opinions as well as scaffolding. So it actually allows you to create the basics of your application without you needing to really understand the intrinsic details of how that application works. It just does it for you. It does a lot of it for you. So generally it will create things like, depending on the one you're using, it might create routes for you, it might create models for you, it might create like a basic application for you to edit, that kind of thing. That's what Create React App is going to do for us. It's going to create a basic application for us that we can use within our application as a starter point. So the first thing we need to do is actually install the Create React App, the application itself. So the way we do that is we type in npm, which stands for Node Package Manager, space, install, all one word, space, create dash react dash app space dash g. And what this will do is install the Node Package Manager, or the Node package, Create React App, that's the name of the Node package, globally across our system. The benefits of that means that we can actually then call the Create React App library, we can call that command, Create React App, anywhere within our Windows system. That's why we want to install it globally. So once we've typed in npm install create react app-g, I've also pasted the command inside the chat window there for you. You can go ahead and click enter, or hit enter, not click enter, and it will install them for you. Might take a little while to install, but you should have it all installed. Oh. I saw that, Leo. I didn't notice it at first. Sorry. Let me move this over here. Oh, never mind. It solved itself. So it looks like we had a troll kicking around. Leo found him. He just left. I don't know how he got a hold of the link, though. That's interesting. Unless he's a part of the class. Alright, I'll wait till the break and check that out. Okay, everybody's installed okay, or is anybody still waiting for the Create React App to install? Anybody waiting? Nope. Alright, cool. Let's go ahead and install it. So to install it, we have to do npx create react app, and then the name of the app that we want to create, right? And this can be whatever you want. The only thing to note, yes?
Sorry to interrupt you. Jessica here speaking for Evase. Can you just hold on 1 second? He's just struggling to try and figure out where to be putting in this line that you're having them type. Do you mind to just go over it for a little bit? And just give me 1 second. He's got a Mac.
Okay.
So he's using Terminal.
Yes.
And then he's also got, he's just trying to figure out how he's supposed to write it because he thinks it might need to be a little bit different.
I don't think so. Not for the Mac.
So
Hold on.
the CD/.
Yes, so the cd commands will be the same. So where he actually opens his files is where whatever directory he wants. It doesn't matter where he puts it in Finder.
So he's on
a Mac, right?
It's on it. So what he's trying to open something to a USB? Does that make any sense?
Oh, he wants to put it on a USB?
Yeah, the file's in a USB.
It won't work. It will, but it'll be a problem. He's going to have read-write problems. So he's better to put it somewhere on his file system. Wherever he usually puts class files would be the best place to start.
Okay.
So if he creates a directory there, anywhere that he does, like, I think there's a documents folder in the Mac as well. If he just was to create a comp 2068 folder there, and then create a subdirectory called lesson 2.
Okay.
And then he can drag that lesson 2 folder, like literally click on it and drag it into Terminal, and Terminal will auto-populate the link for him, and then he just has to add CD to the beginning of it.
Okay.
And that will change the directory for him.
Give me 2 seconds, because
Yep.
you're just looking at his other screen, so I can't tell him until I actually see his eyes. Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, he will try all of that.
Okay.
So he's moving the file to the documents first. That's the first thing you said to do, right?
Yeah, in his documents folder, just create a comp 2068 folder. If he right-click, it should be new folder or something like that.
Okay. Do you mind to just hold on 1 second?
Nope, that's... Yep, go ahead.
And then he's going to do the CD / I think he just spelled USR. Yeah.
He just needs the CD into that folder.
Sorry, just the CD?
Yeah, so the easiest way to do that is in his terminal, if he types the letter CD and then hits space and then drags that folder into the terminal, it will auto-populate the path.
Oh, got it. Thank you very much.
No, not a problem. That's the easiest way to do it.
Thank you. He's got it. Thank you so much for caught up.
Yep, no problem. Okay, so our next step is to... Did he install the Create React app, though?
I will ask him for you. Give me 1 second. You said the Create React tab?
This one thing that I've highlighted here. So npm install create-react app-g. I put it in the chat channel as well. Has he run that command?
Not yet, but he'll do it now.
Okay. Let me know when he has, because I don't want to move on before he does.
Okay. Looks like he's typing. Figure I might as well give you a play-by-play so at least you know what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, he's looking back and forth between the two screens, so he's copying what you have on your screen onto his terminal.
Okay.
Okay, so he did it, but nothing happened.
When he hit enter, did he get an error message or anything?
No, there's no message.
Okay. You know what?
It went down to the next line.
It just went down to the next line. Interesting. Hold on, let me just check something.
Ask him, my screen just froze for a quick second. I'm going to ask him to sign that in because I might not have got that ready.
Okay. Jessica, if he doesn't get any output, if you could get him to run this command I have on the screen here, mpx create react app -v. I'll paste it into the chat channel.
Okay.
It should return back a version.
Because I think what he had was different than yours, so he's going to try that.
Oh, okay.
So it didn't work. Still not working.
Okay, so just to be clear, I'm going to type it into the channel. He needs to be running npm install create react app -g. That's the command he needs to install. Actually, first, can you get him to run this command, node -v, and tell me the output?
So he's just doing the address and then node -v?
No address, just node -v. Tell him to type node -v into his terminal and hit enter. He should see a version number on his screen, like v14.15.4 or something like that. I just want to make sure that he has node installed.
Yeah. Nothing. Didn't work. I'm gonna ask him for you if he's got Node installed. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. No, Nicholas, you don't. It's fine. Whatever version you have is fine. What version do you have? .4.1. What was the version that came up? 4.1? Yeah, no, it's fine. I don't think there's much of a difference between 4 and 3. I mean, that's a big version change, but I don't think it's anything that's going to affect us. If it does affect us, I can show you how to upgrade it. I think you can even just type in npm upgrade create -react -app -g. And then that will upgrade it for you. So it would be npm upgrade. I'll just type the command out for you. And then that should upgrade it. I think that's what it is. It might be update. I think it's upgrade.
Okay, Sean, to let you know, Avase did download Node.
Okay.
When you typed that in, nothing popped up.
It sounds like maybe his terminal is not outputting his commands, so he's not seeing the outputs. Can he restart his terminal? So close the terminal and restart it. He has to exit it though, because like on a Mac, when you close it, it doesn't close. You have to right click and choose to exit it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Sean, just to complicate things a little bit further, so in case, I don't know if you've worked with interpreters before, there's 2 of us.
Yep.
And we switch about every 15 minutes just so that we make less mistakes and monitor each other. So Devin is the other interpreter, and we're switching now, so you will hear his voice if there's an issue in the next 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
So I typed in version 14.14 v4. Is that okay?
No, we don't type that in. We type in node. We're going to type in node -v, and it should return the version for you. So when you type in node -v, it should return that version number as a response.
So it told me version v14.15.4.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's what we want. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so then the next thing we need to do is just make sure that create React app is installed. So if we type in the npx create dash react dash app dash capital V, it should say 4.0.1 or something like that. I'll copy that into the chat window for you, Devin. There.
Okay, he's just doing that now.
Okay. And as long as it says 4.1, we're off to the races. Ryan, yes. So what the dashes are, those dash things, these are called flags. So when you see dash V or anything like that, those are called a flag. The dash and the letter have to be next to each other. I think, actually. You know what? Come to think of it, I don't know. I've never tried. I think it means something different. Oh, no. Yep. Yes. No, it will create the React app if you do that. You'll just call it V. So yeah, it does make a difference. The V has to be next to the dash because the dash is the flag trigger for it. We'll talk a little bit about flags in the future. We're not going to get into them now.
So I think it's successful.
Did he get a number back?
4.0.1.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you, Devin. All right. Just before we take a break, let's just install our React application. So we'll do that quickly, and then we'll take a break, and then when we come back, we'll have a little tiny lecture about what React is and about the component architecture that we're going to be utilizing. So to install a React application, we're going to use npx. And now, sometimes you don't have to use npx. Sometimes you can get away with not using npx. In Windows, I've noticed you have to use npx. In Mac, though, I have seen where all you have to do is just type in create-react app. So if npx fails for you, try leaving npx off. So we're going to do create react-app, all one word, and then we're going to give our app a name, okay? And the name we're going to give it is whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to say my first app. So I'm going to actually just move this about so that you can see the whole line. So this is the line we're copying. I'll put that in the chat window for you. So npx create react app is the command. So this is the command we're going to fire off. And then the name of the application we're going to create is my first app. When you hit enter, it's going to take its time. It has to actually reach out and do its own npm installs as well. It has a dependency list that it's going to try to install for. So it's going to be a whole bunch of things that it's going to attempt to install. So right now it's doing 2 of 4 for fetching packages. And this process takes a little while. I've seen it take up to like 5 minutes for some people. If you're on a Mac, you're going to get an error about S events. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It doesn't cause any issues. It's just a natural error that occurs. Now it's downloading all the React scripts that we need. There we go. We have all our dependencies. Looks like our app was created. It's just going to finish installing the rest of the apps. And there we go. Let me know when yours is done by just typing done into the chat channel. Yeah, it might take a bit. Sometimes it can take almost 2 to 3 minutes to install. I've seen on fresh Windows installs it take a while too. All right. I don't think we need to wait around. So why don't we take a 10-minute break, come back here at 3:02. Actually, let's make it 3:05 or 4:05. Sorry, we'll make it 4:05. So I have a good 13 minutes. And then we'll talk about React and the design pattern that React uses. Yeah, I like the fact that it says happy hacking as well. It's pretty funny. I like that just anything to do with programming these days is considered hacking. Even though it's not. But it's just funny that everything is hacking. Yeah. Even funnier about that, Magus, is the fact that it's a entire client-based application and it says happy hacking. You're not going to do much client-based hacking, at least not with React. All right, I'm going to pause OBS, and like I did last week, I'm going to drop it here. If you see me not click this pause button back again, please remind me. All right, we're back. Okay, so I unpaused it, so let me just move it over here so it's out of the way. There we go. Okay, so when you wind up with a screen where it's got all this wonderful stuff on it, if you want to clear it, it's quite easy by just typing in the word clear, and then that will remove all the excess stuff. It's still there. If you scroll... Actually, no, I guess it clears the history. That's interesting. In other shells, it doesn't tend to clear the history, but that's totally fine. I have everything we need in order to start our application, but we'll do that in a second. We're going to have a little bit of a lecture first. So, what is React? Well, React is a reactive, I mean, it's in the name, right? Reactive, component-based, declarative, right? Front-end JavaScript framework. So React promotes the idea that everything a component needs should be available to it within its own hierarchy. Component design pattern isn't just exclusive to React. The component design pattern exists in other applications as well, in other languages, in other, ideologies when you start working with programming. The component design pattern, the entire idea of it is that a component should have all of the things it requires to function on its own, though it can be a part of a bigger organism, right? Whatever the thing is that you're building, that it can be a part of that, but it itself functions on its own, and it could function outside of that organism with no problem. So when we're building in React, we want to build with that in our thought process, that every single thing we build should be able to function ideally without really any other dependencies. And if it has dependencies, those dependencies live within the component. So we can think of things like a button, for example. So a button has, a few different things, right? We've got a style for our button, right? So it might be blue, right? It might have a press style so that when it's pressed down, it looks different. It might have a hover state. It might have a visited state or something like that, right? So it could have different styles. It could have different actions, right? So that when you hover over it, maybe something pops out somewhere, or when you click on it, it actually performs some sort of functional action. And then it also has text, right? Some sort of label on the button as well. All of those details need to live inside the button as a component. And you might be like, well, it's just a button. Why would you really need just a button component? Doesn't it make sense to add the button to whatever the other component is and make that the component, not just the button by itself? But the thing is React works that way. That's the design pattern that we want to try to follow. It's called atomic design pattern. We want to break it down into the smallest atoms that we can possibly get and build the components as their smallest atomic form. So yeah, a button becomes the smallest atomic form, and there's benefits to that because we can now take our button and actually move our button to other parts of our application, and we contain that same design pattern, we contain that same functionality across multiple areas of our application, all because we're using the same button component. And you can extend the button component as well. React allows you to be able to take something like a button and say it's blue, and we don't want it to be blue, but we want it to be red. But every other aspect of the functionality is the same. We can actually extend our button component and create a new button with it as the framework for it. Component design pattern is really, really awesome. So when we're looking at the component design pattern, there's really two broad spectrums here. We're looking at standalone components as well as compositional components. A standalone component is a component, like I was just saying, that stands on its own. It can function outside of the application and still do everything it needs to do as itself. It's just one individual entity. A composition component is made up, it's composed of a bunch of different standalone components or even other compositional components in order to create a larger organism. So button versus a form, for example. A form would actually be made up of multiple components. You would have input components, the button component, and then all together that creates the form component, right? So React is reactive. React components are JavaScript event driven. That's how the whole process works in React. It actually has a whole life cycle. So when each component actually comes into an existence, we call that initialization. And every single component that you create, no matter how small within your application, will all go through this same life cycle. They will initialize, they will mount. Mount means they are about to render, then they render, and then they're done rendering. That's mounting. They will update, so anytime any dependent data that the component relies upon changes, it will go through an update phase. And then there's unmounting. So once it leaves visibility, it will actually unmount itself. You can think of it like the destructor that you would get in a strict programming language, such as like C++, or even I think Java has destructors as well. So these life events can actually be hooked onto. So we can actually create little hooks that grab onto these different points in the life event and commit, and actually execute some code based on that particular point. So for example, when our button initializes and comes into existence, we can also reach out to an API and grab a bunch of labels and modify the label on the button. Or when the button mounts and it's done rendering, we can actually affect the surrounding DOM at that particular point. Or when it gets removed, we can, send out a message if we decided to. So we can actually tap into each of those life cycle events and be able to fire off some sort of action. You can think of it just like when you're working with the DOM, right? When somebody clicks a button, an event occurs. Same kind of idea, but these events are occurring as the component goes through its life cycle of mounting and rendering and unmounting. So the React application flow is kind of a big topic. And I will share this particular. This is also in your notes, so you feel free to look at this. It's under the React application flow. So it starts with the idea of what happens to a request. And I know that all of you took Intro to Web Programming and you took the Intro to JavaScript. And I'm not sure how much about requests were actually taught, whether your instructors talked about the intrinsic details of a request and how it works. Though that being said, you guys took networking, right? So you would have covered requests and networking as well, I would hope. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I don't know. Anyways, what happens to a request? Well, what is a request? That's the first thing we should look at. What exactly is a request? Oh, networking's this semester. Okay, yeah. So what a request is when you actually type a URL into your browser, or you click a link, right? Or an image loads, or the CSS loads, or a JavaScript library loads. Those are all creating something called a request. What a request is it's a request for some sort of payload, right? Whether or not that's the image, the JavaScript library, the CSS, or even HTML, you're requesting some sort of payload from an endpoint, usually a server. So your client, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your browser. I imagine some of you have Steam, and I imagine some of you have Origin, maybe Epic or something like that. You have those video game loaders as well. They're doing the same thing. A lot of them work on web technologies. They're all completing requests to some sort of server and getting back data such as your game libraries or your trophies and stuff like that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a browser. It can be really anything that's creating some sort of request to another endpoint. So if you look at this, our request, right, when we actually type in an address into our address bar, it creates a request from the browser. The request goes through and it has to be resolved. Now, we type in www.google.com because that's easy for us to remember and that's an easy address for us to share. However, the DNS locations where this request is going to go to, they don't really understand that. They don't understand that that's part of an address that you want. They need the actual address details. And the address in the IT world is not a name. It's actually something called an IP address. And it's usually comprised of 4 sets of numbers. If it's not 4 sets of numbers, sometimes it can be more, but then we're getting into like IPv6 or something like that. But usually, for the simplicity of this course, it's 4 numbers, right? So what happens is you type in www.google.com, something needs to be able to create that relationship between www.google.com to the IP address that is associated with google.com. And that happens at the DNS location. So the DNS is your domain name server. When your request is to the domain name server, the domain name server does a lookup, finds that address and the IP address that was originally associated with it, or the most recent IP address associated with it, and it attempts a ping. It says, hey, are you there? If the server doesn't respond, it will pass it up the chain. And there's actually a few DNS that it will go through before it finally finds the address and the matching IP address, the aliased address and the IP address. So if it doesn't happen at the DNS, it might happen in another place somewhere in between there. Eventually it will reach your ISP, and if your ISP can't find it, it will reach out to, I can't remember the name of the DNS. There's like 10 in the world, and they're the big ones. They're like the big ones. It'll reach out to one of them and get the address and come back to you and send you that information, and then your computer will make the connection. Interestingly enough, though, this can sometimes resolve before it even hits this DNS. It can resolve right at your browser, because your browser will also cache that information. So your browser will cache the www.google.com, points to 176.128.whatever, and it will try that first. So we'll try the cached address first, and if it doesn't find it, then it will pass it up through the DNS. So once the request has gone through this hublub, and no, you don't need to remember this, it's not going to be on a test, just suffice to say that we're trying to get to the server. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get from our browser to Google's server so that we can resolve our request. We typed in our search query, we're looking for the cutest dogs on earth, and we're waiting for the server to resolve and return us back a list of the cutest dogs on earth. So it gets through this stuff, hits the server, and the server is where our back-end technologies are going to take over and figure out what it is that we're trying to do, right? So it's going to take a look at our request, it's going to process it and go, okay, well, you're looking for the cutest dogs on earth. I'm going to reach out to Mongo, I'm going to grab the data from Mongo, I'm going to pile it all back up, I'm going to create a packet, I'm going to take that packet, I'm going to bundle it all together, I'm going to send it to this server, and there might be like 16 different servers that it reaches out and builds and everything else, but when it's done, the server responsible for responding back to you will return you back the HTML, the CSS paths, the image paths, the JavaScript paths, whatever it is you require. It will send all that back as a response packet back to your client. And this round trip happens really, really fast. As you know, generally when you do a Google search, your responses are usually within a few milliseconds, but it happens super, super fast and comes back to you as a response packet. So you get a request and a response. And both of these are entirely visible on your browser. You can actually see these in transit if you just open up your developer tools by hitting F12 and opening your network tab. If I refresh my page here, all of these wonderful things you see in this list are requests that are being sent out with responses coming back from them, right? So 49, for example, which just happens to be the lesson plan number. So here you can see I've made a request, right? So this is the request URL that got sent. This is what the request body looks like. Has a request URL, has the method that I'm using to be able to make that request. So this is a GET request. Hopefully when you guys took PHP, you learned about GET and POST. Those are request methods, HTTP methods. This is the status code. There's a whole bunch of status codes that are available out there, right? But 200, that's what you want. Anything within the 200s usually. Or even 300s if it's a redirect. This is the remote address that it connected to. So even though my website's called scm.education, the remote address is this remote address. 443 is the port number, which stands for SSL, right? So I have an SSL certificate, hence why I've got the little lock, right? So 443 is the port because that's a secure port. And then there's referrer policies, and there might be a whole bunch of these. Right now I have strict origin and cross origin. There's other types of referrer policies and a whole bunch of different policies you can add on to kind of lock and secure your website. So this is my request when I load this page that gets sent back to my Rails server. And then my Rails server generates a response and sends it back as this. So these are all the response headers I get, and these aren't always the same. Some of them are always there, whether you like it or not. Like content type, you'll always have content type. You'll always have the date. But like some of these cache control and stuff, they get added in later. They're actually being added by something called Cloudflare. I've got refer policies, report to, and obviously none of this data is sensitive, right? It's all insensitive, non-private, very public data, and it has to be, because obviously you'd be in problems, right? If it wasn't. So there's also the request headers that you can see. All these headers get sent off to the back end, including cookies and things like that, my user agent being used, all that type of information. The response body comes back as usually raw text, right? So as you can see, it's just a bunch of HTML, right? But our wonderful navigator or code tools that we can use actually give us a preview as well, so we can kind of see what the preview looks like. But you'll notice there's no CSS here, right? No JavaScript running, nothing running, it's just raw stuff. And that's because the CSS and the JavaScript load later inside this batch, so you don't see that in the original response. So the request and the response are super important. They're intrinsic to how the internet works. They're also intrinsic to how our data actually is going to work. However, the breakdown is different depending on the application you're working with. So when we look at this application, we can see this is for Gmail, right? So we have a protocol at the beginning, or a scheme, right? Sometimes it's called a scheme. The scheme is how you're connecting, what protocol you're using to be able to connect to the data. And there's a bunch of different ones. HTTPS stands for Secure Hypertext Transfer Protocol. There's the ones without the S, but they're very rare these days because Google is now penalizing people for not using SSL. The one without the S, obviously, is an insecure protocol. There's also FTP, there's SCP, there's MQQP. There's a whole bunch of different types of protocols that exist, that are out there, that this can be replaced with, that are used for different things that you're doing. The next place is a subdomain. www. Believe it or not, is a subdomain. That's the representation. Subdomains usually map to a directory on the public server. So whatever the public server is, this subdomain is mapping to that. The domain is, that's the main thing. That's the thing you pay all the big bucks for. I had to pay for SCM education, obviously. I have SeanMcKinnon.ca as well. I had to pay for that. If you buy a domain, or if any of you have ever bought a domain, you understand that concept. So you can have a domain, but then you can also have subdomains. And you can have subdomains as well. And you can actually go like 3 or 4 levels down with multiple subdomains if you wanted to create whatever type of address you're trying to do to connect to whatever data you want to connect to. And then the path is usually indicative of a subdirectory within your public domain. So this will take you to whatever the mail domain is for, or the mail folder is on the Google server, and then the Gmail will be a subfolder. So it would be like mail server and then /Gmail server, or a Gmail folder, sorry. So these will lead you to each of those folders. So this is your subdomain. This is your top-level domain. Top-level domains are usually deciphered by a top-level DNS as well. That's your .com, .ca, .eu, .on, .whatever. Any of those type of domains, they're all handled by whatever the country is that deals with that. Our country uses CIRA, C-I-R-A. They're our top domain distributors for the .ca address. So if you register with a .ca, be prepared to get a ton of CIRA emails. But they're who actually distributes the .ca extension. That doesn't mean that's the person you bought it from, though, because you can buy a .ca extension from GoDaddy. totally pulled a mind gap, GoDaddy or Hover or whatever that you want to buy your domain from, but it still does get processed by whoever holds that top level domain's access. So .ca is done by Sierra. We had one for IT because we had this thing called G-Shift-It, but we had to get an Italian domain name or top level domain, which was a pain in the butt because you can't get them unless you're an Italian citizen. So we had to find an Italian citizen willing to register the domain for us every year, and that's what we did for the longest time. That's our short URL server. Wasn't well thought out, but yeah, that's the way we're working that. So when we start working with React, same process, right? But when we start working locally, it looks a little bit different. So we're going to be using an insecure protocol, right? Because we're just developing locally, so it doesn't need to be secure. We're going to be using localhost. Localhost is an alias, just like google.com would be. Localhost is an alias that points to a particular IP address. Does anybody know the IP address for localhost off the top of their head? No? Yes, thank you, Leo. It's 127.0.0.1. That is the general IP address for localhost. Now, you can change it under your VS host file inside Windows. You can modify it, and under your virtual host file inside Mac, you can modify it as well if you wanted to, and have it point to a different local host. It'll create some chaos, though, just to warn you ahead of time, but you can modify it. So when you create a request for the index.html, React works a little differently in the fact that the HTML page, yes, you get an HTML page back, but the DOM structure, the document object model that gets loaded, which you guys would have learned about in your JavaScript class, the DOM that gets loaded is actually a virtual DOM as opposed to being an actual structured HTML DOM. The reason being is because all of the HTML we're going to create for our website is going to be generated dynamically by JavaScript. So JavaScript is dynamically going to create all of that HTML, and then once the page loads, it's going to insert or inject that HTML into the page in a specific element that we define. Sorry, getting a dry throat. So our request goes to index.html. That fires off the request to index.js. When we're working in development locally, we're going to rely on the React development server, the React compiler, to take all of our JavaScript that we've created and compile it into the virtual DOM and inject it back into the index.html, which you see here in the response. This all happens on our development server. The reason why I'm disclosing how this works is because you can wind up with issues and you might be looking through the DOM or your page source and you won't find your issue. And the reason is because of the virtual DOM. So we're going to actually we've already created the React app. We're going to boot it up and I'm going to show you exactly where you can find the DOM and how you can look through the DOM for issues without using the page source. It's better to use the development tools. Alright, so we're going to explore our first application. Any questions about any of the stuff I told you before this? The good news is I don't expect you to remember this. All this is never going to wind up on a test. That's the good news. I do like understanding. I don't know if some of you are like this as well, but I like to know how things work under the hood. I kind of want to have that, deep fundamental understanding of how the technology that I'm working with is doing what it's doing. I don't know. I'm not the person that's like, it's magic, right? I don't want to know that thing is supposed to be just magically done. I want to make sure I understand fundamentally how it's doing what it's doing. And I think that's what makes a good programmer, to be honest, is not just accepting something for the way it works, but trying to intrinsically understand how it works. All right, so we have our React application. If you look, you have it in here inside the folder. However, we are not inside that folder. If you were trying to run the application from the Lesson 2 folder, unfortunately, it's not going to execute. We need to change the directory so we're in this folder. Can anybody tell me how I can change the directory so I'm in the correct folder? Even if you just give me the command. What 2 letters am I going to type? Yes, CD. And then I'm just going to start to type just 2 letters, and I'm going to hit my tab key, and it's going to auto-populate the name of the folder for me. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit enter, and I'm now in my first app. Now to run my application and make sure that everything is working, I just type in yarn, which is that package manager that we're working with, and start. So yarn start. I'm just going to boost this up a little bit. I bet you this is difficult to read. There we go. Hold on, let me clear. Yeah. There. Yarn start. That's what we're going to type. And when you hit enter, it's going to start the React script starts. It's going to start the development server. And kind of intrusively, it's going to open up your browser on you. And if everything is good, you should see the little floating atom. This little window that loads up is really handy because it does give you information. When things break, it does tell you information about what's broken, and it will attempt to try to tell you why it's broken, which can aid in being able to fix it, get it unbroken, so to speak. It also provides you a network address that you can actually visit on your phone, providing you are on the same network. I think I tried this the other day and it didn't work for me because I used the Google Mesh network and it was causing a problem for it. I'm going to try it now. I know you have no idea what I'm doing because you can't see my screen, but I'm going to that address, 192.168.86.37:3000. And we'll see if this loads up on my phone. Yep, loaded up on my phone. Which is kind of handy when you're working in development because as you're building your website and you're building the mobile version as well as your desktop version, it's nice to be able to have it load up on another device. What's the error that you're getting, Alex? New space rebalance allocation failed. Whoo! Out of heap memory. Why would you be out of heap memory? So I'm going to go to Google and type that into Google. Getting it aborted. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering that too. You might have too many things running, Alex. How much RAM do you have in your computer? Like, really, you'd only be having a problem, I would think, if you were, like, not enough. Are you using a Chromebook? It is possible, though, that it's not even just RAM related. It could be that you have other things running, and that something is just consuming. Are you doing any other development right now? Like, are you... Yeah, 8 gigs of RAM would be more than enough to run that. So the only thing I can think of is maybe kill any extra processes you might have running. So like if you have Slack open or Dropbox or something like that, kill those off. And that might free up the amount of RAM that you need in order to run it.
Sean, this is Devin speaking through Airways.
Hi, Devin.
I'm having a problem with mine as well. It seems to be not running with Yarn. It doesn't seem to be working properly. I think it doesn't run it properly.
It's likely that Yarn is not installed. If that's the case, you can also do it with npm start, Devin. And npm start does essentially the same thing. And you definitely have npm installed, like you would if you have node access. You have npm installed.
Okay, I'm just gonna try.
Okay. So while everybody's kind of going through that, I'm just going to minimize this window. And we'll actually take a look at the application itself. Make sure you have the app open inside your project IDE, whatever you're using for an IDE, whether you're using Atom or Sublime or VS Code. Brackets, whatever you want. Just anything but Microsoft Word. Please don't use Microsoft Word to code. You're probably laughing, but believe it or not, I have caught students using Microsoft Word to code. And then, of course, you wind up with a mess of problems, right? Because the quote characters aren't the same. They use fancy quote characters and stuff like that. So just don't use Microsoft Word to code. Use Notepad if you want to go old school.
Sorry, Sean, to interrupt. Speaking for a waste again. I had an error. It's saying, I'm just getting this out again. E-N-O-E. It's something to do with the yarn. It's not working particularly. Who can find the start app?
Can't find the start app. Oh, okay. I know why. What directory are you currently in? Are you in the lesson 2 directory?
Yes, lesson number 2.
Okay, so you need to be in the My First App directory. So if you cd my first and hit tab, it should say cd./myfirstapp. If that's what you called the React application you created. Did you create a React application? Or do you remember?
Just checking.
Yep.
I'm going to have to close the terminal again and then open it again and figure it out.
No worries. If you're in the lesson 2 directory, though, Devin, you can always type in dir, and that will tell you what directories are listed currently in that directory. So it's just dir.
Okay.
And what does it say?
I'm waiting for Waste to respond. So if I type dir...
Oh, sorry, right, you're on a Mac. No, don't type dir, you're on a Mac. Type in ls.
Sorry, ls?
Yeah, ls. And it should give you a list of directories.
Okay. Yeah. I got 2.
Yep. Is one called My First App or something like that?
Yes, I see that. Yeah, one. I have that one.
Okay, so if you type in cd my, like you're typing in the start of the name of it, and then hit tab, it should auto-populate the name for you. Right?
So cd.
Yep, just cd, like change directory, cd, space, type in the word my, and hit tab on your keyboard. And it will auto-populate the directory name for you.
Just waiting for him to respond.
Yeah, no worries.
Doesn't seem to be working, no.
Okay. Like it should. Here, I'll type out the command that he wants to do. So he wants to do cd and then whatever the name of the app is. Do you know what the name of the thing is? Is it my-first-app? Is that what the directory came up as? I'm putting it in the chat window. That's what I'm looking for. If that's what it's called. If it's not called that, it's fine that he called it something else, but I just need to know what he called it.
Just checking. Yeah, it's called My First App. And then...
Yeah. Just, it's important to understand that computers are super literal, so if there's dashes between the words, that's important.
Yes, I have dashes in the middle as well.
Okay.
There's my dash first dash app.
Yeah, so if he types in that command I put in the chat window, it should cd into that. And then he hits enter, and it should cd into the directory.
Okay. Just waiting for him to do that.
Yep, no worries.
Yeah, I copied and pasted what you typed in the chat box, and it didn't seem to work.
Okay, let's, at the break, we'll take a look. We'll have to actually do a screencast so I can see exactly what they're typing.
Okay.
Okay. Right now, we're just going to talk about the breakdown of the application anyway, so it's not a big deal. All right, so just taking a look at the app ourselves inside our directory here, we can see that there's a bunch of different folders and files here. And it might be a little confusing at first because there is so much going on. And you might be like, well, how do I know what things to manipulate, what things to change, right? The good news is the only thing that you're really going to ever manipulate will be the files within the source folder. So if you look at your folders, you have a node modules folder, you have a public folder, and then you have this source folder.
Just to let you know, Sean, it did work in one, actually.
Oh, it did? Awesome. Okay. Toby, that's fine. You don't need to move it. It doesn't have to be in a lesson 2 folder. It just has to have the My First App folder. That's it. So under your source folder, you're going to see a whole bunch of different files that are in here, and a lot of them we're not even going to work with. Like, I've never even seen this one. The report web vitals, that's new to me. That's an entirely new file for me. But yeah, anyways, and then set up tests. That's for obviously doing any test-driven development that you're going to do, but we're not going to get into tests in this class. It's actually for the setup for those tests. There's the logo SVG. That's the SVG that was spinning. SVGs, I'm not sure if you guys know this, but it's technically XML. But this describes that spinning atom logo that we were seeing. There's the index.js, which is a super important file. We have to have this file in order for our React app to work. In fact, our React application has to have an index.html file and an index.js file in order to work. All the other files can be burnt in the garbage. Doesn't matter. We don't need them. We just need those two, no matter what. The other files are helpful, though. Index CSS, this is obviously the CSS styling that we're applying to that page. And then we have a test file and then the app.js file. So the app.js file, generally, you could type out all the information from the app.js file into the index.js file, but most times people keep the two separated. Tonight, we're only going to work with the index.js file just so you get the understanding, the basic understanding of how this works. So what I would like to show you is how, when something changes, how it automatically updates within our browser. So I'm just going to open up our browser window where our little floating thing is. And I'm just going to attach this over here, and it's going to spin and do its thing. And then all I'm going to do is I want to find this information here. So I know where this is. It even tells you edit source app.js and save to reload to modify this page. So if you open up the source app.js file here, and this might seem confusing, it really is just a function. It's just a function, and then we're exporting this function. And we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth, so don't be nervous. But we can modify the words this thing says. So right here is a paragraph tag, and in it, it's got some information in here, right? It says edit code source app.js code save to reload. Hopefully, this seems somewhat familiar. Actually, hopefully, this whole structure seems somewhat familiar, the structure that I've highlighted. Can anybody tell me what type of code this is? What type of programming language is this that I've currently highlighted? I'm sure you guys have done multiple typing it. Yeah, it's just HTML. That's all it is, just plain old HTML. So we can modify this. You know, we can say, look at us. Let's do Wheeze coders. You know what? Let's add some strength to that. There we go. Now when I save this, the cool thing is I don't have to refresh my browser. The second I save this, it's going to auto-update wherever that one happens to be open. Oh, I might have to refresh because I've gone away from it. 1 second, it's going to recompile. Oh, did I collapse my server? I did. Hold on. You have to make sure that yarn is running, so yarn start. Sorry, that's the one fundamental detail. If it's not running, nothing works. There it goes. Look at us, Wheeze coders. Maybe we need an apostrophe there. Wheeze coders. I mean, we need to be grammatically correct, right? There's nothing good grammatically there. All right, so as you can see, as soon as I hit the save, it automatically changed this. And the same thing applies with the CSS. If we were to open up the app.css file, we can see that we've got some information in here, right? Like including the background color. I'm just going to change the background color to pink. Because, I mean, why not? Boom! That's so pretty. What designer said pink and blue don't mix? They mix perfectly. Looks like Easter. And if we want to change the color of the font, we can just modify the color. I mean, what goes better with pink but red? There we go. And this thing's spinning far too slow for my liking, so let's just make it 1. And we'll really get it going. So that's the cool thing about React is as you modify your files, you get an immediate live preview of the changes that you're making. So you just do your thing and just automatically get the benefits of being able to see what they're going to represent. So like I said, there is great importance in the files that we're looking at, and there's some other files that I want to bring your attention to before we actually get into depth of actually creating our own React front end. The pink is too bright. Want me to tone it down a little? Hold on. No pink, let's go gray. Gray. There we go. Oh, red does not work in gray. We need to change that to black. There we are. Awesome. That spinny thing is going to put me into a trance. There we go. Super slow. All right, so other files. Other files that are super important for us to look at. One of the biggest ones being the package.json file. This file actually tells React what modules we have available to us. So as we install modules using Yarn into our application, they will show up here as dependencies. Dependencies is exactly that. It's the things that our application is dependent on. So we have testing libraries currently in here, JSDOM, which you guys are welcome to look at the testing libraries and write your own tests. Though I might do a lesson on testing. I can't remember if it's a part of the syllabus. I forget. There's also a testing library for React, which allows you to be able to test components specifically. And then there's a testing library for user event, which allows you to be able to test things like clicking and stuff like that. There's the fundamental React library, which we need in order to build our React application. The React DOM, which generates a virtual DOM for us to actually manipulate, which I will show you what it looks like in a minute. React scripts, have no idea, don't remember. I think it's just library functionality, so for building components and stuff like that. And Web Vitals, I think, might be the thing that's responsible for dealing with cross-platform issues. I could be wrong, though. I likely am wrong. These scripts are super important. When you type in yarn start or npm start, it's actually calling this right here. It looks for it in the package JSON file and then executes whatever the command line is that's been typed in here. So even if you were to just inside your browser type in react-script start, it would execute the same thing as you typing in yarn start. Build will actually take all of your React files, condense them, and then create a build directory and put them in the build directory. Testing will run any test files, so any file that ends in the word test will get executed. And eject will actually eject the application and show you files and libraries that you currently don't have access to. It does warn you, though. The reason is because you can really screw up your React app if you eject it and have no idea what you're doing. So eject will give you access to the Webpack module that's built in, and you can use that for manipulating, how the compilation works or adding in different types of encoders and templators and stuff. The Eslint functions, this is for linting. For if you're doing any type of linting in your code editor, this will help you, notice and notify when you have errors. The browser lists and the development list are for the browsers that these are to work for. So currently we are developing for anything one Chrome version back. However, our production must be things that are not dead, right? This isn't super important. You're not going to modify that very often. In fact, most of the stuff you'll never modify. You'll start with this, and that's just where you'll go. That'll be it. So as we add dependencies, they will get added here, just to give you a heads up. And we're going to add one dependency right now. So inside our PowerShell, hit Control-C on your keyboard, and it's going to say terminate batch job, yes or no. You can hit Y if you really want to, or just spam Control-C till it goes away. If you're on a Mac, it's Command-C. You'll know you've done it correct because you will just see the directory path. If you're on a Mac, you might just see a $sign. I don't know if it shows the path. It doesn't matter. You're in the directory you need to be in. And we want to install Bootstrap. And I love Bootstrap. Bootstrap is my favorite thing because it makes me, who's a very crappy designer, look like I have some iota of knowing of what I'm doing. Just a tiny bit. A very small iota. I don't even know if iota is the right word. Doesn't matter. Let's do yarn add. Can you repeat what you typed, please? So I typed Control-C twice. I didn't type Control-C. I hit Control-C twice. So when our yarn app is running, the only way to exit out of it, just let it boot up, is by hitting Control on our keyboards and C. And then it will say terminate batch job. You can press Y on your keyboard if you want to, or just hit Control-C again, Stella. And then that will get you out of it. Cool? Good? Yes? No? Awesome. All right, so now we're going to add Bootstrap to our application. So we're going to type in yarn add Bootstrap. So it's yarn add bootstrap. And then press enter. What that's going to do is it's going to reach out to the Bootstrap repository. It's going to pull all of the repository information and dependencies that are needed for Bootstrap down into your application and install them for you. So now our application is going to have Bootstrap in it, and you know this because in the package.json file under the dependencies, it has been updated with a new line saying Bootstrap version 4.5.3. That's how we know that worked. We're not going to use Bootstrap quite yet. We'll use it in a bit when we create our own other files. So another thing to note is there is a Readme file in here. That is essentially a markdown file for your Git. Right? So when you push all of this to Git, that comes into play. Same with the git ignore file. The git ignore file, its whole purpose is to ignore things that are not necessary for your Git repository, right? So node modules, for example. If you look at the git ignore file, you'll notice that node modules are set to be ignored. And the reason is because the node modules take up a considerable amount of space. GitHub, for example, has a limited amount of space that it will allow you to use when you put a data into the repository. I think it's a gig, actually. I think it's up to a gig is the maximum you're allowed to dump into the Git repository. It might depend on the language. Anyways, just for example, I'm going to reveal this so you can see the size of it. And I'm just going to right click on it and choose properties. I just want to show you don't have to do this. Just want to show you how big the node modules file is. So the size on the disk is 197 megabytes. So our node modules take up that much. And you might be like, well, that's a hefty file size. That's a big application for something that's just a spinning atom. The reason is even though all the dependencies get pulled down, every one of these dependencies defined has their own dependencies as well. And you can actually see those under the yarn lock file. The yarn lock file shows you not only the dependencies for whatever it is that you're working with, but also all the dependencies it relies on as well. So for example, the Babel core relies on all these dependencies and they all get downloaded. So when you look at the node modules directory, there is a lot of files in here and a lot of libraries that are all pulled down. The good news is React uses something called Webpack. So when we actually go to build this and publish it to the internet, we're not building and publishing, 300 megabytes of information. We wind up actually publishing maybe a few kilobytes of information because it will only actually take the node modules that are being used and the libraries that are being used and bundle those into our build. If they're not being used, they get neglected. They get completely, it's called tree shaking. They get essentially shooken from the tree so that they're not a part of our actual build. So it is very efficient at the end of the day, but it is a lot of stuff all at once when you first start up. And you definitely don't want to be pushing these into Git. So you may ask the question, well, how does the person that's using my repository, or even myself, if I pull my content from my repository, how do I get my node modules back if they aren't being pushed up? Well, the good news is all we have to do is call yarn. The second we call yarn or yarn install, it will actually run all of this package.json file and install all the dependencies for us, and our node modules folder will be rebuilt. So we will look at that so that you can see that at some point. All right, we have talked a lot. Any questions so far? Not yet? All right, so like I had said before, this index.js is super, super important, but so is the public index.html file. Those two files are very important to us because they are the files that our application is going to wind up building and using. The index.html is because the browser only understands HTML. Yes, it can parse JavaScript, and yes, it can parse CSS, but it can't render the JavaScript on the page if you open it. If you open just the JavaScript file, it'll be raw text. You need the HTML page to load the JavaScript in as a source. So what happens, if you look at the bottom of this page, or maybe it's the top of the page, somewhere in the page, there is a script tag somewhere. I must be missing it somewhere. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe it does it later. It might do it when it builds. It might actually build the script tag into the HTML page at that point. I'm not seeing it right off the top of my head. Oh, there is a manifest file. That's probably why. So basically what happens is when our page loads, you'll notice there is a div here that says ID root div. Let me correspond that. I'm just going to yarn start so that you can see our application. So here's our yarn start, right? I'm going to view the page source, and you'll notice there's not a lot of code here. It looks exactly like this page here, and it should, but you'll see that there's this line, div ID root div. What that line is doing, if we look at our index.js file now, you'll see this line here on line 11 where it says get element by ID root. So this is how React is actually performing its magic. It essentially looks for this root element and then injects whatever is in here in the render, the first argument of the render argument, or of the function, into this div ID root. So any content that this generates gets injected in here. So you might, hopefully you're asking the question, well, how come I can't see anything, right? I know that there's a React application. I can see this image. We should see an image tag, right? Like at the very minimum, we should see an image tag. We should see, look at us, we's coders. We should see the Learn React link. We should see those HTML elements, but we can't see them in the page source. And the reason why is because even though our JavaScript is injecting this data into the page source is only the fundamental HTML that was rendered when the page was first initialized. So if I want to see these elements, I need to look at the virtual DOM that gets created by React. So what we use instead is we right-click, we click Inspect, and we use the developer tools. The developer tools will actually show us, as you can see, here's the root, right? There's the div root, will show us the individual virtual DOM elements. So now when I open it up, I can see that I have a class called app. There's app right there, right? In there I have a header. So if I go to this app file, which I can find right here from the import, app.js, I can see there is a header. Yep, sure enough, there's a header. And there's an image source. Yep, there it is inside my DOM. And there's my paragraph tag. And there I can see, look at us, we's coders. So the virtual DOM is accessible to you. It's only accessible to you under the developer tools. So that's an important concept to understand. All right. That will help you a lot with deciphering where to find things if you're not sure why they're rendering the way they are. And then the console in here will also reflect any errors that you see in your terminal. So if any errors show up here, you should see them within the console window as well. All right, we're going to take a small break, and then when we come back, we are actually going to build a small little Hello World app, right? Super small, super tiny, and then we're going to stick it in Git and push it up to Netlify. That's our goal. Hopefully we'll get there. So let's take 10 minutes, and we'll meet back here at, you know what, let's just meet back here at 5:15. All right. There we go. I'll dock this over here. Cool. So we are actually going to modify this. We're actually going to take out all the stuff we don't need, like just everything. We're going to gut it. And then we're going to make our own little module pieces. So let's just collapse. I'm not sure if you have this in your IDE, but you should be able to collapse these folders so that you don't have to see them. Incidentally, in VS Code, there's a collapse folders in Explorer button as well that you can just click, and it will collapse the folders for you. So we're going to work in the source folder, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove everything but the index.js file, and that's going to cause this thing to break, just to give you a heads up. So I'm going to get rid of app.js. I'm holding down my control key. app.css, app.js, app.test.js, index.css, logo SVG, report web vitals, setup.test.js. So I've highlighted those files by holding control down. You should be able to do it in your IDE as well. So highlight those folders. The only one we want left is the index.js file. We want to keep the index.js file. Everything else we want to get rid of. Okay, so once you've got all those highlighted, you're just going to hit delete on your keyboard. It's going to ask you if you want to delete them. I'm going to say yep. So all I have in my source file now is just this index.js file. It's the only file I have. Everything else is gone. And now you'll notice in my browser I also have an error, which is fine. That's totally okay. The error can live there. So we're going to make a very, very, very simple React application. Just going to say hello world. That's it. Nothing too special. But we need to get rid of some stuff. So we have a lot of things that we're currently importing right now. And we'll talk about import and export next week when we create our first component. But this, well, we're technically creating a component tonight as well. But for now, we're just going to create something simple. We don't want this report web vitals line, the app line, the index.css line. We want to get rid of those 3 lines. So the only lines that we have are import React and import React DOM from React DOM. And then I also want to get rid of all of this stuff underneath so that all I have left is these 9 lines. And then I'm going to take it one step further, and you can see this one argument in here that's wrapped with the React strict mode. I'm going to remove that altogether. And instead, I'm going to replace it with these divs. So I will copy this because that's where I want you guys to start. And I will paste it in here with the name of the file that we're working in. And then the code. Now I think this is shut off. Yeah. So as you can see, nothing is on your page. If you refresh, you might have to refresh to get it to jumpstart, but there should be nothing on the page. So the cool thing about React, one of the biggest cool things about React, is JSX. And JSX allows us to be able to basically tie JavaScript in with XML, right? So XML in this scenario being HTML. So we can actually take like JavaScript and HTML and kind of marry the two together. That's the cool thing about JSX. The other cool thing about JSX is your IDE will actually respond better to JSX if the file ends with the JSX extension. So I'm going to take this index.js file and I'm going to rename it. So you can right click and likely choose rename in your IDE. You might even be able to press F2 to do it. But we're just going to rename this to index.jsx. Now this is going to fail our application, and the reason is because this file has already been injected into our public HTML file. So what we have to do is refresh won't work, right? It's just going to keep saying an error. Instead, we have to go into our PowerShell, hit Control-C to terminate our application, and then type in yarn start again. So we're back in PowerShell, we have terminated our application, and now we're yarn starting. And the reason we're doing that is because it will now load up the index.jsx file with the proper extension, and we should get a better page. We're going to get this source error as well. Why are we getting that source error, actually? I know I've done this before. Oh, maybe they changed it and you can't rename that one. Oops. All right, let's backpedal. Sounds like we can't rename it. I'm going to rename it back to JS. I wonder why they changed that. Oh, actually, it kind of makes sense. Oh no, now it's looking for it. It did work for you. Yeah, now it's looking for it. Now it's my fault. I need to refresh. There we go. Yes. Okay, cool. We want JSX. The reason why we want JSX is because our IDEs will actually load the proper syntax highlighter. For example, now this says JavaScript React, which means I'm getting syntax highlighting for the JSX file, which makes more sense. It also stops IntelliSense from being IntelliStupid and loading like error messages and stuff when it's really not an error. Somebody should create a new IntelliSense called IntelliStupid. What's the error that you got, Stella? Oh, in your package.json file. So if you're getting an error in the package.json file, then likely something has been edited in this file. And it's caused an error. So your file should have the same format that mine does. So you know what? I'll just copy this file because you can replace it. I'll create a paste bin. There we go. And if you go to that paste bin, Stella, you can just copy the contents from it and paste it into your package.json. You probably just backspaced a quote character or something silly when we had it open. And you'll have to restart your server. But just replace the contents of your package.json file with that data. All right, I'm just going to jump back over to my React application, and all we're going to do is just add in hello world. Literally just the text, hello world. Maybe we'll put in a comma in there, and we'll add in a period, just so it's got a bit more grammar. We're going to grammar it. I've saved it. I don't know why I have to refresh, but I have to refresh to get it to do what it's supposed to do. So yay, we have hello world. Look at us. We have made our first React application. So like I said, the cool thing about this, yeah, no worries. The cool thing about this is that it's just JavaScript. Between these render tags, so the React render actually expects two arguments. The first argument is the HTML you want to render, right? It doesn't care what the HTML is, but it must be a top parent tag. So I can't just all of a sudden add another tag in here. You'll notice that this thing is freaked out. It's so mad, and it says JSX expressions must have one parent element. The element being this div, right? That's the parent. Hello world would be a child. So if I want more tags, then I have to make sure they're in between these two div tags. There is something called a fragment that we can use that will allow us to be able to add multiple tags and still have a top parent tag, but we'll talk about that next week. For now, what I would like to do is actually be able to kind of modularize my code a little bit better. It's not often that you would type raw HTML into the render tag. That's usually not a good idea. The better idea is to just create a component and then pass it the component to render. So we're going to create our first very simplistic component. I know I said next week will be the week that we create the component. I mean, I should actually preface that with we'll create an external component next week. This week we're going to just create one internal to this file. So we're going to create a function. That's the cool thing about components. They're just functions. We're going to give it a name, hello world. That's a good name. And there we go. We have a hello world function. That's all it is. We need a function. And then once we have the function, we can actually replace this code you see here with the function call. There we go. We're calling our function. This is going to result in an error, though. If I refresh, you'll see that well, actually, it won't result in anything. I'm surprised it didn't result in an error. We don't actually have a return statement. But this isn't generally the way that we would write this in React. In React, what we do instead with components is we treat them as though they were written like HTML, like we're writing our own HTML tags. So we can actually write this just like an HTML tag. I'm going to put a less than symbol in front of it and follow it with a self-closing greater than symbol tag. So this is what the tag looks like. But we still have no data, right? There's no data being rendered, and that's because the hello world function, even though we're calling it, isn't actually outputting anything yet. We need to return some JSX. So we're going to return a JSX line. And there's a few ways we can write this, but generally the common convention is to put in a set of parentheses, hit enter so they're split apart, and then write your JSX in there. I don't know why I have to keep refreshing. It's just auto refresh, but it isn't. Like I said before, we have to list a top tier parent element. It won't let us have another element below this. So if I wanted to say hello world and change hello world into an H1, so I'm going to actually just highlight the div, and on my keyboard I'm going to hit Control D, and it's actually going to select both of these. This works in VS Code. I don't know if it will work in something else you're using, but I'm going to change this to an H1. Yeah, I kind of wonder if the index.jsx doesn't get registered for the live server updates. I mean, this is the only time where we're going to actually be working in index.jsx. Starting next week, we'll always be building an external component. So I get hello world in my H1, and then I just want to write in a nice little paragraph tag underneath. I'm just going to hit P and hit tab and let Emmett do the work for me here. I'm going to write, how are you today? But it's going to give me a kablooey. Yep, here we go, kablooey. And we have a kablooey because we have two elements sitting at the same level as siblings, and they don't have a parent, but we need a parent. But here's the thing. I don't want these arbitrary divs for no reason. I mean, we're going to write semantic HTML, good semantic HTML. So if I'm writing good semantic HTML, I don't necessarily need divs everywhere. Instead, I would rather just have one element. So the easiest way to do this, I could wrap this in a header. I mean, that would be semantic. But I think it's better just to use a fragment. And we can do this in two ways. We can either import the fragment library from React, the fragment component, sorry, from React, or we can use the shorthand, which is just an open close greater than symbol with an open closed tag symbol, like so. And there we go. Remember how we loaded in Bootstrap? Right now, this is not the prettiest thing in the world. It would be nice if it was a little prettier, and we can pretty it up with just a little bit of Bootstrap. So I'm going to import Bootstrap, but I'm just importing the CSS library. So when I type import, I can start typing in Bootstrap, and this is nicely filling in my paths for me. This is reading this from the Node modules folder. It's actually importing the module directly from the Node modules folder. It's in my distributable directory. It's under the CSS, and I just happen to know the name. Unfortunately, it doesn't automatically populate it. And I'll give you guys that import statement so you can paste it into yours. I'm going to hit refresh, and there we go. We got this nice bootstrappy text. And then I'm going to use my favorite Bootstrap thing in the world. It makes everything look so beautiful. It nicely centers everything, adds some beautiful margins, and that's called container. Now, I can write it in between the fragment, or I could just replace the fragment with it because everything I'm going to put in now will be within the container. So it's totally up to you. Either you can write it inside or you can replace the fragment. I want to create two cursors because I only want to write the word container once. So I'm going to put my cursor there. I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click again, and that creates two cursors for me. Then I'm going to type in the word container. Sorry, no, I'm not. I'm going to type in the word div, and then in the top div, I'm going to write in the class name equals container. That's what I'm going to do. Sorry, I was thinking about a different thing altogether. And now we have it inside a container. Can anybody tell me the reason why I might be using class name here and not class? Does anybody want to take an educated guess? Has to do with the language we're writing in. I'll tell you.
Okay, so saying, is it because you're going for a direct class, like relating it directly to the class?
That's exactly it, actually. So what it is, you're on the right track for sure. Essentially what happens is class is a keyword. And because class is a keyword in JavaScript, we can't use class. If I use class here and I save it, I'll show you what happens over here. I'm going to hit refresh. We get this warning from React. DOM property class, did you mean class name? And the reason why it's giving us the warning is because class is a keyword in JavaScript which could cause an error when it goes to compile our React component. So we use class name instead. And when we save it, we lose the warning. It disappears. Now I want to take this and I want to add one more thing to it. I want to put it in my favorite thing in the world, which is, I call it the Pudgy Transformer, because it's named Jumbotron. Just sounds like a Pudgy Transformer. Tab these, oops, I'm moving things about. I'm going to add the closing div down here, like so. And you know what? All this stuff isn't nicely tabbed. I can hit Control A, right click, and choose to format my document, and then everything looks nice and tidy. And now I've got the Jumbotron. See, just a few classes, and it looks way nicer than when I originally typed it. Class is actually related to HTML normally. So if we were writing raw HTML, class would be what you would use whenever you want to use a class in CSS, right? And like you're saying, yeah, it's related to the CSS class. However, because we're writing in JavaScript, technically, class is a keyword, so we have to use class name. Otherwise, it causes a conflict. Even though I've never actually experienced the conflict before, but it does throw a bunch of warnings. All right, I'm going to copy this for you guys. And I will paste it into here for you. We don't have a lot of time. I'm hoping we have enough time to at least... Let's just push this to our GitHub accounts. And then next week, the first thing we'll do at the beginning of class is deploy it to Netlify. So we'll do that at the beginning of the class. You are welcome, if you want to jump ahead, you can. If you look at our class lesson file that's inside the shell, in the Lakehead shell, you'll find that there's a module in there called Deploying to Netlify, and it does walk you through it, but we will talk a bit more about it because I do want to discuss why we're deploying to Netlify, what CI/CD is, and what all these mean. I would like to explain that. But for now, we will just push to GitHub. So how I'm going to structure my GitHub with these lessons is totally up to you if you wanted to follow suit, but I'm basically just going to name the name of the course, the semester it's in, and the lesson we're on. So I'm going to go to GitHub. And I'm going to create a new repository. I enabled dark mode. I love it. It's so nice. Repository, and I'm going to call it comp 2068-W20 for the name of the semester. Sorry, 21 actually. Lesson 02. So comp 2068 or 10. Sorry, it's 2068, not 1068. Comp 2068 W21 lesson 02 is what I'm going to name my repository. You don't have to name it that, but I mean, it does make it easier to keep track of. You can give it a description if you want to or not. You don't need to add a Readme file. In fact, I wouldn't, because it can create more issues. Then you have to do a force push. I would just leave it the way it is. All right, and then I'm going to create the repository. So now I have these commands for Git, and that's what I'm going to use in PowerShell to actually push my Git. So I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to dock him over to the left so you can see what I'm doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is cancel my app, so I'm going to hit Control-C 2 times so that now I'm on this line. That's my first step. My second step is to type in Git Init, which will initialize a Git repository inside this directory. In fact, it reinitializes it because when you create the React app, it automatically initializes one for you. I'm going to skip this git add, and I'm going to type in git. Well, I am going to type in git add, but I'm going to do git add dot, which will add all of the files currently in the repository or in my file folder structure. So all of them get added except for the no modules folder because of the git ignore. Just ignore this warning. LF will be replaced by CRLF in the package.json file. It just has to do with the different line endings from operating system to operating system is all. So just ignore it. It doesn't cause any problems. So I've git init, I've git add. Now I'm going to git commit. And -m is a flag. That means I want to add a message. So I'm just going to say init and hit enter. So that will show all the changes that have occurred in my repository compared to the repository currently. So I've deleted all of these files, it knows that, and I've created all these other files, and it knows that. Now these other ones pertain more due to the political climate and how we want to get away from adding in the origin master branch. I've tried them, but I've had issues in the past. So git branch -m main will actually create a new master branch called main, I believe. But we still have the master branch kicking around, so it does cause a bit of confusion. So if we do git branch -m with a capital M main, that should create a new master branch. Then we need to add the git remote. So I like to just copy this because, I mean, I don't want to type that out. So this is our remote origin. And then we're just going to paste it in here. So that will add the remote location, the remote repository location, to our Git So when you're using Git, just so you realize, I'm not sure if you guys have been told this before, but Git add and Git commit are only local things, right? These are only things that happen locally on your computer. They don't affect your remote repository at all. It's not until you add the origin and then you use push and pull, which are the things that affect the remote repository. So push and pull are strictly for the remote repository. You can technically do Git locally and never have a remote repository. There are people that do that. They just use version control locally and that's it. But if you want to have a source of backup, then it's a good idea to use the remote repository. So then our last step is git push. And when we do the git push the first time, we have to set the upstream. So we do a -u, and then origin, and then the name of the branch we're pushing to, which is main, and we hit enter. And if it worked, you should see enumerating objects, counting objects, the deltas, which are the changes that are between your original and this one. So once you've pushed, you should be able to hit refresh on your GitHub screen, and you should see your code. And you should only have one branch called main. So next week what we'll do is we'll set up Netlify. First we'll set up the account because everybody will need an account. We'll create a new site and then we'll connect it to GitHub and it will auto-deploy and build for us. So that's the whole concepts of CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment. We're not going to get into integration or unit testing in this class, but that is usually a fundamental part of CI/CD. Other than that, that's it. That's all I got for you tonight. Is there any questions? So I have a class in an hour. I will post this video right away. It likely takes YouTube, I don't know, about 30 minutes to process. I think you can start watching it pretty quickly, but it's in low resolution.